Hello and welcome to this new blog post from the Do You Know series. And in today's post we will have a look at greenhouse gas emissions and how we can allocate them within the Sustainability Manager. So before we dig into details, let's have a look at the underlying problem. And what I want to illustrate you here is an example that is basically saying that the greenhouse gas emissions that we measure, they might not be at a level that is detailed enough for our analysis and reporting. So as an example, the electricity or heat or cooling that you consume is measured for a whole building, but you need it for the individual offices or departments within the building. Yeah? So here's a graphic where you measure basically electricity, heat and whatever you have through counters or kind of devices. But actually what you want to have is, you want to see what is the consumption for the admin department, for sales, for purchasing that are within this building. Yeah? And of course you don't have individual measurement devices that measure only the heat for purchasing or sales, but you have it only for the whole building. And then the question is, how can you kind of calculate the emissions by department and so on. Yeah? So the solution is, in the Microsoft Sustainability Manager, we have a new allocation feature. That's the result. Here we see different allocations that I run. Yeah? So you can do this multiple times with different allocation percentages. And then you see here I have the greenhouse gas emissions associated with the purchasing, sales and admin department. Okay, but the question is, how do you achieve this goal and how do you arrive at this Power BI workspace? And the first step is, of course, to set up allocation methods. And an allocation method is, well, basically nothing else than a kind of name or convention that allows you to separate different methods. Second step is then to set up the allocation method details. And what is that? Well, here you define the allocation source and destination. So where are the greenhouse gases coming from? In my case here, Contoso Würzburg. Yeah? And where they're going to? Here to admin, purchase, sales. Yeah? What you can also see from here is I have three different methods set up. So number one, number two and number three. And I use different ways how to allocate. For the first method, the first three lines, I allocated here 20, 50 and 15%. So I wanted to see, can I allocate something that is different from 100%? And that's what I try to do here. Then in the second allocation method, I say I have 1,000 kilo and 250 go to sales, 600 to purchase, 150 to admin. So in total, that's 1,000 kilo that we allocate, so 100%. And then in the last case, I said, okay, I have 100 kilo, or 100%, you can also say, and I allocate only basically 60%. Of course, the crucial thing is, how do you arrive at these percentages or at these measurements that are the basis of your allocation. And that's something you have to figure out. Of course, you can do it like people are doing this in cost accounting, based on headcount, based on square meters, based on some percentages. But you always need to be careful whether this is really the underlying or the correct key or ratio that you can use to allocate the emissions according to this. So as an example, if your admin people, if you have 20 admin people, 50 purchasing people, 15 sales people. But if these people here just work from home, never come to the office, then such an allocation key would not make sense. So there are a couple of things that you might take into consideration to arrive at this allocation method details. Next thing, once you have defined the allocation details, then you set up an allocation profile. And this is basically just telling, okay, do an allocation with this method for this period, and the result can then be seen here. And if you click on the hyperlink, you can also see the individual calculations that have been made. And then of course at the end you see here a dashboard with the results. But that's not the end, because, well, you might know that I have a finance and accounting background. So what I try to do is, of course, saying, hey, we have now the different emissions. Let's do something with them. And what I did is I created a flow and I said, okay, we have quantities and I know the CO2 price that is recommended by some environmental organizations has a certain amount. I put it here in the trigger and then I create journals, multiply the quantities with this CO2 price, and then I create journal lines so that I get an environmental monetary footprint in my finance and accounting system. We will have a look at this shortly. Here's the journal that was created. I said there's a price of 180 per ton or kilo or whatever you have. And these numbers here, 13, 7, 14, this is the purchasing department, this is sales, and this is admin. On the other hand side, I have here an offset account. That's basically where the greenhouse gas emissions come from, and they are allocated to here from here. So that's basic accounting things. But now, after doing all of this explanation, let's have a look into my system and how I set up these things. Okay, so let's get started here in the Microsoft Sustainability Manager. I'm here in the reference data section, and the first thing you set up is the allocation methods, which is basically just a name. So if you click here, you see name, description. That's what you have to fill to differentiate between the different allocations. Then the next thing, that's the most important one, is the allocation method details. So if I open that, you can see that I have 3 different allocations. It's number 1, then we have number 2 here, and then we have number 3. And here I try to test and play around a bit with the settings. So in the first method, we allocate from Würzburg to admin purchase sales, and that's the percentages. Then I have the same, but with kilo and a total value, and then again here at the bottom I only make an allocation between Würzburg and admin and sales. So that's also pretty easy to define. The key is, of course, how do you set up these values, and that's something you have to come up with and define. Then next thing is to have a look at the allocation profiles, and I set them already up. So what are you doing here is the following. You click on new, and then you click or select your emission source. Can be heat, can be electricity, can be steam, can be whatever. You can select multiple elements here. Then you have to say, is it location or market based? And then you define for which period you want to do and run the allocation. And here I just select here January to May. And if you want, you can do some additional filtering. I'm not doing that here. So next thing is you select this method, which is basically the details that we specified and the percentages behind. And then you say, how often do you want to allocate? So for example, monthly. And if you want to do a step-by-step allocation, or run multiple at the same time, or for this processing, then you can also include multiple here. And then the next thing would be to give it a name, and then you are finished. I say cancel here because I'm not doing that. I have this already set up. The last step, once you have this set up, you just run the allocation. So there is currently no automation for that. So you would have to click on that, which is in my opinion not an issue. Okay, the last step, once this is processed, or maybe let's have a look. Once you run such an allocation, you see here a line. If there's a mistake, you see it here. And if you click on that, you can see what has been allocated. So if I sort that, you can see the first 3 lines, they are for January, then comes February and so on. You see the quantity. These are metric tons of CO2 emissions, and then you see the destination. And all of these data, they are then going into our dashboards. So if I open that one up here, then we can see the different allocations that have been run. So I have 3 different ones here. One for heat, Würzburg to the cost centers, and then some quantity based, and then some on this allocation where I say only admin and sales. And the key is, of course, these allocations, they don't impact the original emissions. Yeah, so it's like in cost accounting. If you're familiar with that, it does not touch the original emissions, but it gives you additional insights. Yeah? And then before we go into details, let me give you a quick dig into a deep dive into the allocations that are done and the outcomes. Yeah? So I run all of these allocations, and then I came here and I said, okay, the results that are here, export them to Excel. Export the allocation results. That's what I did. Why? Because I wanted to see how are the allocations that we defined, how are they actually calculated. So if I come here and if I see the first allocation, then I can see 20, 50, 15%. So the result of this allocation, I put it here, and then separate it by month. So first we have January, then February, then March, and so on. And what I did here is I just summarized the different allocations. So for January we have here 59, then for February we have 125, and so on. And I added this up, which means 588 metric tons have been allocated. And if you remember, I allocated only 85%. So if I divide it by 85, by 0.85, I arrive at 100%. Gives me around 692 metric tons. And that's what I compared here with my original emissions, 692. So that's pretty okay. Yeah? And then of course I was interested, hey, how are these allocations made within a specific period for the individual areas? And that's what I did here. So red is admin, green is purchase, and then we have yellow for sales. And then if you remember, we had 20, 50, 15. And if I just calculate 20 divided by 85, if I calculate 50 by 85, then I get these fractions. And then now what I wanted to see is this 13 divided by the sum of this, is this the same? So what I did is 13 by the sum of this is equal to this. Then we have this one divided by the sum is identical. So that's the way how the allocation is made. So this was just a test for me to see if this is correct. The next thing, if we quickly go back, for the second allocation, I said, okay, I want to have 250, 600, 150, for a total value of 1,000. So I'm basically having here 25%, 60%, and here 15%. And I wanted to see what's the outcome. So I calculated also things here. I said, first give me the quantities by months. Again, I summed this up here. In total 691.89, which is again in line with our total emissions. So that was correct. And then I also checked what is the individual allocation that was made. Is it based on these percentages? And what you see here, if I open you my calculations, you see that I'm calculating this based on the allocations made. So also this is correct. And the same thing I did for the last allocation, where I only have 2 areas, admin and sales. I just double checked the amounts and wanted to verify whether the whole amount is basically allocated or not. And every time I reached at this result. So if you want to double check whether the results are okay or not, you can always come here in the data section, allocation profiles, and from the allocation profiles you can always see what has been allocated, and if you have more allocations there will be more lines, and if you drill into the lines you can see the result. Okay, so this was the first step. The second step was then I said I want to have this in my accounting system. And to do that, I created this flow. I triggered it manually and said, okay, once you trigger it, you have to specify the CO2 price. Why? Because in my accounting systems, I want to have values. Then I created a journal header, and then I selected one of the allocation profiles. So if you remember, we had 3 allocations, but I said for accounting purposes, I'm just interested in this. Why? Because I allocate 100% here. That's what I did, and I filtered here for this number 2. Of course, you can do things differently. But from there, I basically hold the variable, and then in the allocation results table, I filter here for this allocation profile. And then I said, I'm only interested in the allocation for the last month. So I said, okay, the start group date time should be the current month. I filtered it with this calculation that gives me the first day of the month, allows me to filter. And then once I have these allocation results filtered, I can have the quantity. The value is the quantity times the price that I defined. I have the destination. I hold the cost center. And then I can fill the journals and say, okay, if it's purchasing department, then you create a journal that has the financial dimensions of purchasing. So this one. Then if it's admin, then you select simply a different financial dimension. So if we scroll down here, then you see this is a different number from this and so on. So that's pretty easy. And let us quickly test what happens if I run this. Should not take too long. Again, I have to set up a price. Maybe let's make 200 now. I run it. And now we just have to wait until this process is finished. And the result should be that a journal is created here in my accounting system. So if we go back, then I'm in the general ledger here. And there I have my journals. And that's the last journal that was created. Let's see if the lines are already filled. If not, we have to wait possibly a bit. Oh, we already have the lines filled. You see, this is the account, the debit account that holds the allocations. Here's our price of 200. That's the amount, and that's the offset account. So from a system perspective, this is the one. This is the account or area. I call it home here, where the emissions come from, and this is the area where the emissions go to. From an accounting perspective with monetary values. And of course, if you post this, and I'm not doing that here, I just want to simulate the posting to see if everything is correct. So if you would post this, you can include this data in your financial statements, in your analysis, in your reports, in whatever you have. But this basically completes what I wanted to share with you here. So let's go back to my PowerPoint for some important closing remarks and limitations of this whole concept that you might take into consideration when you apply this methodology. Okay, so here at the end, some limitations that you should be aware of if you want to use something similar. So first thing is, these allocations, they work for this operating units or facilities that you can set up in the Microsoft Sustainability Manager. They are not working for this custom dimension. If you know this custom dimension, these are basically kind of text fields that you can set up and that allow you to separate your emissions by different areas. The allocations that I talked about, they are not intended for that. At the moment, I cannot allocate them to the different custom dimensions. Then the second thing is you cannot allocate more than 100%, but less. That's what I tested. And of course, the multi-step allocations that I also mentioned, you can realize them with a kind of workaround by defining multiple allocations. But it's not like one go, like what you might be used to from a cost accounting system. It works, but with a little bit of additional setup. Then what I said is the allocations can be defined for organizational units and facilities. That's what we have. Then it's not made for product-based greenhouse gas emissions. For these product-based greenhouse gas emissions, there's already something on the roadmap. And maybe if you see that video, it's already available. But these allocations, they are not intended for this purpose. And last thing is, there is currently no auto run or auto schedule feature that automatically triggers these allocations. But you have to go into the system and then just press run the allocations, which should be okay because you can run a couple of months in a go. And opening this function one time a month should be okay, in my opinion. So at the end, I would like to thank you very much for watching and listening. And as usual, if you have questions, comments, remarks, post a comment in the comment section of this post, or send me an email to lreinhardt@live7@live.de. So it's L, not I, where you can send your message to. So thanks again, and then I'm looking forward to the next blog post.